Her true story from San Diego began quietly, the way most dangerous lies do. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 64 years old, a retired school registrar, and for the last 4 years I have lived alone in a small white house overlooking the quieter side of San Diego Bay. After my husband Thomas passed away from a sudden stroke, silence became my daily companion. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that settles into the walls and follows you from room to room. I learned to fill it with routines: morning coffee on the porch, a walk along the harbor, Saturdays at the fisherman's market, where the salt air mixed with the sound of gulls and familiar voices calling out prices. For 3 years, 2 months, and 13 days, I told everyone the same thing. My son Daniel was overseas on a long-term contract. He was an electrical systems consultant, highly skilled, highly demanded. Singapore, South Korea, sometimes Europe. That was the story. It was the story his wife Marissa told me, and I repeated it until it felt true. I said it to neighbors, to church friends, to the women who sold me fresh shrimp every Saturday morning. I said it with pride, because believing it gave my life meaning again. My boy was successful. My sacrifices had mattered. Marissa was always the messenger. She handled the calls, the updates, the explanations. Daniel was busy, she would say gently. Different time zones, sensitive projects, confidential contracts. She said these things with a soft smile and careful eyes, the kind that never lingered too long. When holidays passed without a call, she had reasons. When birthdays came with only a brief text, she had excuses. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Sometimes, late at night, doubt crept in. I would stare at my phone, scrolling through old photos of Daniel before his supposed departure. His laugh, his crooked grin, the way he used to call me every Sunday without fail. I told myself, men change, lives grow complicated. Mothers must learn to let go. Grief has a way of making lies feel like mercy. Every Saturday morning, I walked to the harbor market just after sunrise. It was my anchor. I bought oranges from the same vendor, fresh bread from the same stall. I listened to the same stories about weather and fishing yields. People there knew me. They knew my husband had built boats. They knew my son worked abroad. They would nod approvingly when I spoke about him, and I would nod back, convincing myself that repetition made something real. On one of those mornings, with the ocean calm and the air cool, I felt watched. It was subtle at first, the way you sense a shadow before you see it. I turned and noticed a man standing a few steps away, mid-30s, wearing a faded jacket and holding a small parcel. He looked nervous, eyes darting toward the crowd and then back to me. He spoke my name before I had a chance to ask his. That was the moment my carefully constructed story began to crack. He said my name quietly, almost carefully, as if afraid it might break something fragile between us. Mrs. Brooks. I turned fully toward him then. Up close, I could see the strain in his face, the faint tremor in his hands. This was not someone making a casual mistake. This was someone who had rehearsed this moment and still wasn't ready for it. "Yes," I answered. "Can I help you?" He swallowed and glanced over his shoulder toward the fish stalls and the moving crowd. "You're Daniel Brooks's mother, right?" The sound of my son's name in a stranger's mouth sent a sharp jolt through my chest. I nodded slowly. I am. His shoulders dropped, just slightly, like someone who had finally found the right door after knocking on too many wrong ones. My name is Caleb Moore, he said. I'm not supposed to be talking to you. I shouldn't even be here. Before I could ask what he meant, he pressed a small package into my hands. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address, no markings. It felt heavier than it looked. Please, he said quickly, don't open this here. Don't show it to anyone. Watch it when you're alone. Watch what I asked, my voice already tightening. He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked back to the crowd again, then to the harbor, then back to me. I can't carry this anymore, he said. I tried. I told myself it wasn't my business. But your son, he deserves better than silence. My heart began to pound. Is my son okay? Caleb hesitated, and in that hesitation, something terrible bloomed in my chest. Whatever answer he was choosing between, none of them were good. I'm sorry, he said finally. That's all I can say out here. Just, please don't ignore this. Whatever they told you, it isn't the whole truth. They? Who are they? But he was already stepping backward, shaking his head. I have a family, Mrs. Brooks. I've already said too much. And then he was gone, swallowed by the Saturday morning crowd, as if he had never existed at all. I stood there holding the package, the noise of the market suddenly too loud, too bright. The smell of fish and citrus turned my stomach. Around me, people laughed, bargained, moved on with their lives. No one noticed the way my hands had started to shake. I walked back to my car without buying anything. The package sat on the passenger seat like a living thing, silent and patient. I didn't turn on the radio. I barely noticed the drive home. As I pulled into my driveway, memories I had pushed aside began to surface. Marissa's tight smiles, the way she always answered for Daniel, the fact that I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard my son's voice without her nearby. I had told myself it was modern life. I told myself not to be needy. I told myself I was proud. Inside the house, the quiet felt different now, heavier, expectant. I set the package on the kitchen table and just stared at it. This was the same table where Daniel had done his homework, where my husband had carved Thanksgiving turkeys, where lies had never been spoken loudly, but had lived quietly for years. For the first time, I allowed the thought I had been avoiding to fully form. What if my son was not where I believed he was? I closed the curtains, locked the door, and sat down. Whatever was inside that package was about to change everything. I waited several minutes before touching the package again, as if time itself might soften whatever truth it carried. My hands felt clumsy as I tore the brown paper away. Inside were 3 things: a USB drive, a folded photograph, and a single sheet of paper with handwriting so tight and hurried it was almost painful to read. I picked up the photograph first. It was Daniel. There was no mistaking that. My son's face had always been unmistakable to me, even as the years changed it. But this version of him made my breath catch. He looked thinner, sharper somehow. His eyes were the part that hurt the most. They weren't empty. They were alert, too alert, like someone trying to signal something without being allowed to speak. He stood in front of a blank concrete wall, holding a newspaper at chest height. The date was clear, 3 weeks ago. I sat down hard in the chair, the photograph trembling between my fingers. 3 weeks ago, Marissa had told me Daniel was in South Korea, finishing a major contract. I had repeated that lie to 3 different people without hesitation. My gaze dropped to the USB drive. I carried it to the old laptop I kept on the corner of the table, the one my husband had insisted I learn to use. It hummed to life slowly, the way older machines do, as if reluctant to be involved. When I plugged in the drive, a single folder appeared. Inside were several video files, each labeled with dates stretching back nearly 2 years. I clicked the first one. My kitchen appeared on the screen. Not a similar kitchen, not a place that looked like mine. My kitchen, filmed from a high corner angle I didn't recognize. The timestamp showed a weekday afternoon when I knew I had been volunteering at the library. On screen, Marissa entered through the back door using her key. She didn't hesitate. She went straight to the cabinet where I kept important papers. I watched as she methodically removed folders, photographing pages with her phone. Deeds, insurance documents, bank statements. She moved with confidence, like someone who had done this before. I felt sick. The second video showed my bedroom, my dresser drawers open, my late husband's desk rifled through. The third video was the garage, where she searched through boxes labeled with my handwriting. Each file revealed the same pattern. She only came when I was gone. She never looked rushed. She was searching for something specific. I closed the videos and reached for the letter. Mrs. Brooks, it began. I work delivering private packages. I was assigned to drop items at a secured care facility near San Diego. That's where I saw your son. He wasn't overseas. He was inside, awake, watching the outside world like someone waiting to be remembered. My vision blurred as I read. The letter explained that Daniel had been admitted under a guardianship order, that Marissa controlled all contact, that Caleb had started asking questions and was warned to stop. I stared at the photograph again. My son had not disappeared into a career. He had been erased. The house around me felt suddenly unfamiliar, as if I had been living inside a stage set, while something real and dangerous moved just beyond the walls. I realized then that the lie had not been about distance. It had been about silence, and someone had worked very hard to keep it that way. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the photograph of my son face down beside the laptop, the USB drive resting between my palms like a confession. Every memory replayed itself differently now. Every moment I had dismissed. Every excuse I had accepted because it was easier than asking why my own child had vanished from my life without protest. Just before sunrise, as pale light crept through the curtains, something tugged at my memory. A key. I stood slowly and walked to the hallway closet, opening the small wooden box where I kept my husband's watch and wallet. Beneath them lay a thin brass key taped to an index card. I hadn't touched it since the week Thomas died. Riverside Credit Union, Box 319. I remembered the argument we had about it years ago. I had asked what it was for. He'd smiled in that tired way he used when he didn't want to alarm me, and said it was just precaution, something every parent should have. I let it go. I always let things go. 2 hours later, I stood inside the credit union's private room, my hands trembling as the attendant slid the metal box across the table and left me alone. Inside were documents carefully arranged, copies of property records, bank statements, and on top, a sealed envelope addressed in my husband's handwriting. Eleanor. My chest tightened as I opened it. If you are reading this, I am no longer here, and something has gone wrong. He wrote that he had noticed changes in Marissa long before Daniel supposedly left the country. Financial inconsistencies, conversations that didn't line up, the way she spoke about control instead of partnership, the way Daniel grew quieter, more hesitant, more managed. I didn't have proof then, he wrote, but I trusted my instincts enough to prepare. He explained the family trust he had quietly created, one that placed all major assets under protection, one that could not be accessed by spouses under guardianship arrangements, one designed to activate if Daniel was ever declared incompetent or isolated from family without cause. I sat there shaking, tears spilling freely now, realizing my husband had seen the danger coming while I had been busy telling myself everything was fine. At the bottom of the letter, one final line stood out. If Marissa ever comes looking for documents, it means she needs something she doesn't have. Do not help her. Fight for our son. I left the bank with the box clutched to my chest, my grief no longer soft and sad, but sharp and focused. This was no longer about betrayal alone. This was about survival, about undoing a lie that had been carefully engineered over years. For the first time since my husband died, I felt him beside me again, not in memory, but in purpose. Whatever system had taken my son would not keep him, and I would not stay silent another day. I did not confront Marissa, not yet. I smiled when she came by. I poured her tea. I listened as she spoke about Daniel in careful, polished sentences, always vague, always reassuring. I watched the way her eyes tracked the room, the cabinets, the shelves. She was still searching. That told me everything I needed to know. The next morning, I made my first call. His name was Arthur Levin, a retired legal consultant my husband had worked with years ago during a property dispute. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious but kind. When I told him what I had discovered, the line went quiet. "Eleanor," he said slowly, "what you are describing is not uncommon. It is just rarely uncovered by family." He explained guardianship abuse to me in calm, brutal terms. How adults could be legally isolated. How medical opinions could be influenced. How assets could be quietly redirected while families were fed carefully worded lies. It was not a single crime. It was a system, one that depended on silence and exhaustion. Arthur gave me one name, not a company, a person. Lena Park, independent investigator, former compliance auditor for elder care facilities. She had left after refusing to sign off on reports she knew were false. Lena met me 2 days later at a quiet cafe far from my neighborhood. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out, the videos, the trust, the letter. When I finished, she did not look surprised. "Your son is not the only one," she said. "He is just one of the few whose family is still fighting." She told me about facilities disguised as care centers, about guardians who specialized in control, not care, about medical directors who signed diagnoses based on convenience, not truth. She told me that once someone was placed inside that system, getting them out required speed, proof, and luck. Luck was not something I was willing to rely on. 3 nights later, Lena called me after midnight. "I found someone inside," she said. "A nurse. She quit 2 weeks ago. She kept copies." We met in my kitchen before dawn. The woman's name was Emily Reyes. She looked young, exhausted, and terrified. She slid a flash drive across the table and folded her hands tightly in her lap. "Your son was never incapacitated," she said. "He was monitored, restricted, silenced. Every time he asked about you, it was documented as agitation. Every time he tried to speak freely, privileges were reduced." I closed my eyes. Emily showed me internal assessments. Cognitive tests marked normal. Notes altered after the fact. Billing statements that did not match the care provided. And one thing that made my blood run cold: a signed recommendation stating that continued isolation was necessary to prevent family interference. Marissa's name appeared again and again. As Emily left through my back door, Lena stayed behind. She looked at me with a seriousness that felt heavier than fear. "They know when families start asking questions," she said. "When they sense resistance, they move fast. If Marissa realizes you are no longer compliant, she will not hesitate to use the same weapon on you that she used on your son." I nodded, because deep down, I already knew. The lie was not just protecting itself anymore. It was preparing to strike back. Marissa moved faster than I expected. 2 mornings after Emily Reyes left my kitchen, an official envelope appeared in my mailbox. Thick paper, court seal, my name typed with cold precision. I stood at the counter for a long time before opening it, already knowing what I would find. A petition for competency evaluation. Marissa Brooks requested that the court determine whether I was capable of managing my own affairs. The document described me as increasingly forgetful, emotionally unstable, and prone to paranoid accusations. It referenced my grief over my husband's death, my isolation, my age. Attached were statements from a physician I barely remembered seeing, carefully worded to suggest concern without proof. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I sat down slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. She was doing it. Exactly what Lena had warned me about. The same weapon, the same strategy. If she succeeded, she would control my finances, my home, my ability to speak, my access to Daniel. I would disappear just as quietly as my son had. That afternoon, my phone rang again. Marissa. Her voice was softer than usual, touched with practiced worry. "Eleanor, I heard you've been very upset lately. I'm concerned. I just want to make sure you're taken care of. You've been under so much stress." I realized then that this was not panic on her part. This was confidence. That night, another call came in, this one from an unknown number. "Stop digging. This is your only warning." I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to Lena and Arthur instead. Less than an hour later, Lena called back. "You need to understand something," she said quietly. "When people like Marissa escalate, it means they feel cornered. But it also means they are willing to destroy you to protect themselves." The next morning, the news delivered the final blow. Caleb Moore was dead. A single vehicle accident on a coastal road north of the city. Authorities cited fatigue. No foul play suspected. No witnesses. The report was neat, efficient, final. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so loudly I thought I might faint. The man who had handed me the truth at the harbor. The man who had chosen his conscience over his safety. Gone. I closed my eyes and understood the cost of this fight. This was no longer just about my son. It was about a system that erased people who spoke, about how easily a lie could kill, about how silence had protected monsters for years. For the first time, fear nearly won. But then I thought of Daniel, alone, watched, silenced, believing his mother had abandoned him. I stood up, folded the court papers, and placed them neatly into my bag. If Marissa wanted a battle, she had chosen the wrong woman. I had already lost too much to be afraid now. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just the temperature, but the air itself. Sterile, detached, designed to make emotions feel out of place. I sat at the wooden table beside Arthur Levin, my hands folded neatly in front of me, my spine straight, my face calm. I refused to look like the woman Marissa had described in her petition. Across the aisle, she sat flanked by two attorneys, dressed in soft gray, hair perfectly arranged, eyes lowered in practiced concern. If someone didn't know the truth, they would have seen a devoted daughter-in-law burdened by responsibility. They would not have seen the architect of a prison. The judge entered. We stood, we sat. Marissa's attorney spoke first. He painted a careful picture, an elderly widow overwhelmed by grief, a mother unable to accept that her son was unwell, a woman clinging to delusions because reality hurt too much. He cited my age, my isolation, my supposed paranoia. He spoke gently, as if speaking about me rather than to me. When he finished, the judge turned to Arthur. Arthur stood slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize. He simply said, "Your Honor, this case is not about a mother losing touch with reality. It is about a woman uncovering a crime." He introduced the evidence one piece at a time. The videos of Marissa entering my home while I was away, the altered medical records, the internal cognitive assessments that proved Daniel was lucid, the financial trails, the correspondence recommending isolation to prevent family interference. Marissa's expression did not change, but her jaw tightened. Then Arthur made his request. "Your Honor, we ask that Daniel Brooks be brought before this court for independent evaluation, immediately." Marissa's attorney objected, claimed psychological harm, claimed medical risk, claimed necessity. The judge raised a hand. "If Mr. Brooks is as impaired as you claim, an evaluation will confirm it. If he is not, this court has serious concerns." 2 hours later, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Daniel was wheeled in. The chair was unnecessary. That much was obvious the moment I saw his posture. His eyes found mine instantly, sharp and alive. In that single look, 3 years of silence shattered. I pressed my lips together to keep from crying. The court-appointed psychiatrist spoke calmly, confidently. "Mr. Brooks is fully oriented. He understands his circumstances. He demonstrates no cognitive impairment requiring guardianship. In my professional opinion, his confinement was medically unjustified." The room stirred. The judge turned to Daniel. "Do you understand why you are here?" "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was steady. My wife claimed I was incapable so she could control my assets. When I refused to break the trust restrictions, she pushed me during an argument. After I fell, she took advantage of my injury to obtain guardianship. I was isolated, silenced, monitored. I tried to reach my mother. Every attempt was blocked. Marissa stood abruptly. "This is fabricated," she said sharply. "Trauma creates false memories." Arthur nodded once and held up a recorder. "Then perhaps the court would like to hear this." The audio filled the room. Marissa's voice, clear, unfiltered. "You should have stayed confused, Eleanor. Daniel was never strong enough to protect what was his. I did what I had to do." The silence that followed was absolute. The judge did not hesitate. "The guardianship of Daniel Brooks is terminated, effective immediately. The petition against Eleanor Brooks is dismissed with prejudice. This court orders a full criminal investigation into Marissa Brooks for fraud, coercion, and unlawful confinement." The gavel struck. Marissa's face drained of color as officers approached her. Daniel stood up from the chair and walked toward me. For the first time in 3 years, my son was free. And the lie that had ruled our lives finally had nowhere left to hide. Daniel came home 3 days later. Not to a hospital, not to a facility. Home. To the small white house by the bay, where his childhood laughter still lived in the walls. When he stepped through the front door, he paused like he didn't quite trust the moment. Then he exhaled, a sound that felt like it carried 3 stolen years with it. The healing did not happen all at once. Some nights he woke disoriented. Some days he sat quietly on the porch, watching the water, as if relearning how time moved when no one was controlling it. I learned that freedom does not erase damage. It only gives it room to mend. The investigation unfolded quickly after the hearing. The care facility was shut down within weeks. Several administrators were charged. Files were reopened. Other families were contacted. More names surfaced. More lives quietly returned to daylight. Marissa was sentenced months later. Fraud, coercion, abuse of guardianship authority. The judge used words like calculated and predatory. I sat in the back of the courtroom holding Daniel's hand, not feeling victory, only relief that the lie could no longer touch us. Caleb Moore did not get justice in a courtroom, but he was not forgotten. Daniel and I visited his family privately. We told them the truth. We told them that their son and husband had saved a life by refusing to stay silent. I still think of him every Saturday when I walk past the harbor. Some courage leaves a permanent echo. Today the house is loud again. Daniel cooks dinner. I complain about the noise. We laugh. The kind of laughter that doesn't rush, the kind that stays. Sometimes people ask me how I didn't know, how a mother could believe a lie for so long. The answer is simple and uncomfortable. Because it was easier. Comfort can be dangerous. Silence can be deadly. And love without courage is not protection at all. I share this story because someone watching right now may feel that same quiet unease I once ignored. That feeling when explanations come too easily, when someone controls the narrative too tightly, when your instincts whisper that something is wrong and you choose not to listen. Do not make my mistake. Ask the hard questions. Trust what your heart notices before your mind explains it away. Systems built on secrecy only survive when good people stay quiet. I did not save my son with strength or money or power. I saved him by choosing truth when it was terrifying, and I would do it again without hesitation. 5 life lessons from this story. First, comfort is not the same as safety. Second, control often hides behind the language of care. Third, silence protects abusers, not families. Fourth, your instincts are warnings, not inconveniences. Fifth, one person speaking up can change everything. If this true story moved you, take a moment to reflect. What lesson did you take from this story? Where are you watching from right now? Please like, share, and comment. Your voice helps these stories reach the people who need them most.